great to be with you, especially after the last couple of days when I was at East Lansing, Michigan. Michigan State University. 0 to 5 degrees, little snow on the ground and on cars. The buildings were warm though, so that was a plus. John asked me to come in and kind of kick this off, and I'm happy to do that. So I'm going to give you a context of a good morning. There's a lot of friends here, so it's great to see all of you again. I want to talk about the higher education Whitewater that we are in the midst of. This is actually not someplace in Florida, but I do have a Florida water shot at the end. So I don't think there is a height that high in the great state of Florida. There may be some big rocks, but not that high. We could take almost any one of these topics and spend a good portion of a day talking about the impact of these particular topics on the business of higher education. And so John gave me 2 hours, and I'm going to spend about 10 minutes. No, he did not do that, on each of these. What I would say to you is that your topic and this conference is timely. These are issues that need to be addressed. I can tell you, again, from my Michigan State experience, I had a great experience chatting with administrators and faculty members yesterday morning, and they are grappling with this, but not grappling all that well. They're talking about MOOCs and what they're going to do with MOOCs, and maybe using some MOOCs to reach some populations through in agriculture outside the U.S. But we were spending time, the registrar was there, and I asked her, so if I'm a student and I knock on your door and I say to you that I have just completed a MOOC, comment on a MOOC in a moment, an engineering course from MIT, will you give me credit for it? And everybody, there were 25 people there, and everybody kind of chuckled, and she said, no, we're not at that point yet. And I said, the question to you and to all of you is, when will you be at that point? Because if you're not granting that credit, we'll find someone who will get it on a transcript or get it on a paper and make it a recommendation, and ultimately it's probably going to end up back on her desk, registrar's desk, for some consideration. They are just starting to get their arms around that. So the fact that Florida is engaged in this conversation, and I think more deeply, not only at the institutional level, but at the state level, is a real plus for you. So I'm not going to spend time talking about every one of these, although I probably could. I do want to spend just a few minutes talking about some trends that are driving a lot of this Whitewater, if you will. 5 of them in particular. These were actually drawn from, and I've highlighted this in the past. I don't know how many of you have seen the report that Ernst & Young did, a study on Australian higher education. If you have not seen it, something you should easily downloadable, free access, easy to read, compelling story about the changes that are afoot in Australian higher education. And essentially they're saying the model that we have has got about a 10 to 15 year shelf life, and then it's going to go away at the institutional level. Pretty frightening. Yes, it's Australia. The point I typically make is the Australian model looks a heck of a lot like the US model. We're just much bigger. We just have many more competitors, if you will. And yet, you could, I think, draw or bridge the notion of what is happening in Australia is probably going to happen, at least to some extent, in the U.S. So, these 5 trends. And in some respects, the MOOCs have driven this, maybe to some betterment. Generally speaking, I don't think that's the case. I'm intrigued, as probably many of you are, with this kind of Pall Mall rush to MOOCs, the hysteria, the paranoia. We got to get on board. Kind of notion. All of it, I think, speaks really to what I would call the democratization. We need to provide far greater access to learning activities, knowledge, content, and the MOOCs have done that. I think the problem we have with MOOCs is the C at the end of MOOCs, because as soon as we put course on it, institutions say a course is a course, And we have to take it through a process. And so it's fascinating now to look at what's happened over the last couple of months. This week, the issue with Georgia Tech, a faculty member who put a MOOC out there and it blew up. It didn't work. And headline news in the Chronicle. I understand that. There were a Coursera institution and a Coursera course, if you will. But I would ask this question of you: how many of you in your online activities have always had a course, put it out there, runs fine, nothing crashes? It doesn't happen. It simply doesn't happen. So the fact that we're making a lot of noise about this Coursera course and the fact that the technology was not geared up or really ready to do it is a story, but I don't think as much of a headline story as it needed to be. Point being that we are in fact in an era where content is available, it's rich, and students or prospective students or quasi-students are in fact wanting to get access to it and will. The marketplace is amazingly competitive. You're not only competing against yourselves, you're competing against the for-profits, you're competing against institutions from outside the U.S., and this is not going to go away. We can come up with whatever strategies we want and all kinds of neat consortia, but you will be in a competitive marketplace with far fewer dollars. I think Florida's the only state that's had reduction in support for higher education, right? No. I mean, the reality is we're going to be asked to do more with less. The reality is that legislators have kind of caught on with this MOOC notion and figure, okay, we don't need 75 sections of American history being taught in class in a traditional setting. We'll just have one star faculty from one of our institutions deliver that history course. And it doesn't cost anything because these MOOCs, of course, are free and life will be good. That is, in fact, the mentality of legislators. That's not the mentality of institutions, obviously. So we're going to have to deal with that. We're going to have to kind of work on that. But we need to disavow legislators and others who influence the policymakers that MOOCs are not, in fact, the best example of online learning. It's kind of a nice problem to have for Sloan C. On the one hand, I don't know what it would have cost us to put on the front cover of Time magazine in October something about online learning and MOOCs and Sebastian Thrun and 150,000 students and artificial intelligence. We couldn't buy the cover. That's good. So there's a much broader understanding in the general public about online learning. The downside of that, the sharper edge of the sword is, that's not really very good online learning. You all are doing something better in terms of online learning. Most of us believe that interaction with students, student to student, student to faculty, is really kind of an important dimension of measuring the quality of an online course. MOOCs push materials out. As someone at Michigan State said yesterday, well, we don't have to worry about students who can't log in. They have no one to call. There's not an issue. It's out there. They grab it when they want it. We don't have to worry about testing. It's that notion again of free. It's just, so what we're trying to do organizationally now, and as a community, is to say, yeah, there's a lot of good stuff going on with online learning, but don't necessarily jump to MOOCs as the answer. Digital technologies, the global mobility, not only of students, but of our product, if you will, of higher education, is clearly with us. And more we are, I think, being forced, not a bad thing to do, if you will, being forced to be more responsive to industry and in integration with industry and responding to their needs. So 5 trends that are driving, if you will, this Whitewater that I referenced earlier. Talked about some of these, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. Is it going to transform higher education? Going to impact it? I don't know if it's going to transform it. Is it revolutionary? No. Is it evolutionary? I would say yes. We're going to have to deal with it, or deal with the impact, if you will, of what is happening with MOOC. But I would argue that the real backdrop, our real challenge is our costs keep going up. but our production, if you want to measure production in terms of degrees, percentage of students who complete degrees, is not keeping pace. In fact, even before we had this MOOC phenomena, this is back in the good old days of SREB, Holly, which was a year ago. We were already starting to hear legislators comment to our institutions, but we've given you millions of dollars to build buildings and to develop curriculum and to hire faculty. And look at the record. How many students are in fact completing, even using the federal measure of 5 years? So we've, in a sense, kind of created our own problem, if you will. Much of my time still is spent on dealing with adult learners, some who have some college credit but no degree. Fred's going to talk about that more later on. It's a huge market. I keep saying if we did a better job in our traditional programming, however we defined traditional, we wouldn't be dropping in that 25 to 64-year-old working age group millions of students every year. I mean, we're up in the 40+ million adult learners in the U.S., some college credit, no degree. So they started with us, haven't finished, and that's become a market. And as I've said to folks who are involved with that, that's not a market that's going to dry up anytime soon. So our graduation track record is not where it needs to be. And I'll go back to my SREB days, 3 strategies that they're playing out, and I think they're the ones to play out. We need to do a better job of preparing our high school students for the rigors of a collegiate education. 2, we need to do a much better job once we get them to our campuses to keep them on our campuses. And 3, if we can't keep them on our campus for whatever reason, and obviously students will leave for whatever, many, many reasons, we need to be ready to reach back to try to bring them back in. But actually the bigger problem right now is the value proposition for higher education. We're being questioned like never before, not just by policymakers, but by the general public about the value of a post-secondary education and credential. So we can roll out all of the numbers, and there are great numbers to show how much money someone can earn with a baccalaureate degree or an associate's degree or a graduate degree. And those are fine numbers, and the ability for someone to go out into the marketplace and be competitive is enhanced certainly by a degree. But we've got the public now really questioning, and some lawmakers now, policymakers now questioning the real value of a post-secondary education. There was a piece in the, how many of you have heard of Dale Stevens? Not a single person. There was a piece on the Chronicle this morning about Dale Stevens, who I've heard speak now twice. Interestingly enough, both times outside the U.S. I was with him back in November at a conference, and he was turning 21 that week. He's turning 21 years old. He has a book that's coming out in a month called The Uncollege. And his whole raison d'etre, if you will, is you don't need to go to college. I'll show you how to learn. I'll show you, and this whole MOOC thing now just kind of centers things for him. So look at the book. Go visit, the next time you're online, visit The Uncollege. And look up Dale J. Stevens, 21 years old, has his own company, was homeschooled, okay, so there's a context point here. It is a compelling story. I don't buy most of it. The 2 audiences that I've been in when he's made these comments, you hear the young, fresh kid, what is he thinking about? It doesn't make any sense. But I've heard some administrators say, you know, while his message of not going to college is not the right message, his message about how we should go to college is. So when you look at what he has to say, think about it in the context of how should that in fact change or make us think about how we need to change what we're doing. And it really relates to the value proposition. I think for the first time in my now becoming a long-toothed person career, we're really having this struggle to get back to the community, to get back to the population to say, this really does have value. But we've got to change the propositions. And I think some of the work that you're looking at doing with competency-based learning, semester compression and what have you are clearly the way to go. So So now you'll hear me pontificate for a few minutes. Trends that are either out there or will be there that I think are going to impact your work as you move forward. I start with this because this is my business, if you will, that this notion about online and on campus, I think it's going to be learning. And in fact, we're at the edge of that shore already, that this is about learning. And most of you in the room, you're there. Or if you're not, you need to be there very shortly. That it's just about learning, and the modality is a kind of a different matter. I got a little pushback yesterday from a faculty member at Michigan State who he still has questions in his mind about this online stuff. And as the conversation went on, we were talking about platforms and which platform is best. And I said, so you're actually using some platform strategies. I mean, there are tools, there's technology you're using, and he admitted yes, but he did not see the link between that and learning activities. He's kind of a traditional guy, wants to be in the classroom. He'll either move to us or move into retirement, and then his slot will be filled by someone who probably has a little bit better feeling for exactly where we're headed. The tools are only going to get better. More powerful, cheaper, and we have this. It's amazing to watch the 11-year-old grandson, even the 7- and 4-year-olds kind of pick up these tools and work with them effortlessly. And the idea that we would not be using these tools in our instructional strategies, both at the elementary, secondary, and post-secondary levels, I think is, while we still struggle to get there, is not going to be an issue. They're out there. We're going to make use of them. I think this next big wave on Mobi is kind of intriguing. So how do we package this stuff and get it onto mobile devices? Faculty development. Faculty continue to be a challenge. Not just this Michigan State guy, who is a very nice person, by the way, but a continuing challenge. And let me turn this around a little bit. They can argue this is not the way to deliver a quality post-secondary education, but the reality is it's there, it is, and it's going to impact probably the professor more than anyone else. Institutions are already seeing the challenge of the traditional structure and system that we have, the limitations that we place on faculty, or faculty place on themselves in terms of instructional activities. And the model doesn't work. It's working, but over the long haul, it's not going to work. Change is afoot, no question about that. I think I talked a little bit about competitors, both academic and non-academic. I didn't see Straighter Line on the board. We should have had former SREB colleague Mike Garn here to talk about Straighter Line. It's rare that I don't get an email from them with promoting some other activity. Credits for less, we can do this. We've got mentors now. The best one was, I haven't seen this in a while, was about 6 months ago. There was 2-for-1 special. I was going to give Burke Smith drop him an email and say, what is this 2-for-1 special? Come on in, but that's the reality. And they're coming to us in the community, but the more they reach out to the broader populace, so we can go to a campus and spend a couple of $1,000s taking a course in a traditional way over 15 weeks, going 3 times a week, or we can take this route with a mentor and pay a monthly fee and a little bit and get it transcripted. Powerful competition. I think we're going to see more of that. Competency-based learning. Anyone here from Texas? Okay, so let's talk about Texas and the $10,000 degree pushed by their governor, and the challenge was picked up, and they believe that they can offer a degree, total complete degree for $10,000. But look how they get there. Look how they get there. They use things like Straighter Line. They use various forms of competency-based learning, portfolio assessment. Thank you very much. They essentially keep that student out of the classroom for as long as he or she can be kept out of the classroom. Seat in a seat is costly. Seats in seats, it's costly. Time consuming. It's expensive for us to deliver. It's expensive for the student to secure. And so all of these strategies that in fact take that student out of the classroom and propel them forward in terms of a degree. And not just adult learners, but I think even the more traditional learners is here and needs to be embraced. I'm intrigued by this whole notion of badging. Reminds me of my days in the Cub Scouts. I never did get to the Boy Scouts. I got the first 2 or 3 things, and I said, I'm not going to go out into the woods and rub 2 sticks together and build a fire and I don't need that stuff. But it's interesting because I'm sure most of you probably are engaged in some way, shape, or form on a website. Truth be told, I was on the NFL.com website on Sunday during the Super Bowl. And I was actually getting badges for being on the site. I've done nothing else. 41 points in badges for apparently being, I was trying to get some statistics from the game. But badging becomes, so take it out of kind of my fun and games and now put it into an educational context. And we're going to be faced with how we recognize someone's badging. And if we don't, someone will. There'll be the next straighter line that will say, well, we'll recognize this. In fact, work might already be recognizing it, I don't know. So this whole notion of credit and credit recognition and what a credit is, so I'm looking forward to the conversation with our friends from COC at Sachs today, I think become a huge challenge, pivotal challenge for us. Problems for a lot of institutions. Alternative programming, I mentioned the Texas $10,000 degree. I've not heard of actually a student who's gone through for $10,000 in Texas, but it is conceivable that one could in fact do that. But the alternative strategies to get to a degree, I think, is really the key point here. Time costs money, and it's the seat and seat notion. And you cannot get away from this notion about how faculty roles are going to change. Not only in terms of how courses are offered. I don't think we're going to turn into a MOOC society in terms of higher education. I do think we're going to have many more MOOC-like qualities. The concept behind MOOCs, I think, is fascinating and fun, and this kind of Pall Mall rush to it, I think, is a little bit crazy. But it will have an impact on kind of how we do our business. I think we need to be sensitive to that. How courses are offered, when they are offered, size and scope of offerings. How many of you have asked a faculty member to take on, John, can you take on 10 more students in this history? Can you do it? Can't take on 10 more? I'll take on 10 more if you give me another support person to help me do grading or what have you. John was doing that with 5 students, I should add, but I do not hear the same faculty who are probably complaining about not having enough resources saying, I'm happy to take 150,000 students. I should have asked the question of Sebastian, I was with him back in the fall, of, now, if you had to add 10 more students in your on-campus class, could you do it? I bet he would have said, can't do it. I got a registrar's issue, and I got a departmental issue, and faculty workload issues. He had 150,000+ students in his AI course. Policy. So kind of at the end of the day, I'm essentially, John knows this, a policy wonk. All of this stuff is great, but I like to put it in the context of policy and how we change. Accountability pressures will not abate. So if you think, well, we're going to get over this hump, legislatures will, and general assemblies will look at us for a while, and then they'll move on to something else. The dollars assigned to higher education, public higher education in this country, are far too large, and our accountability is just not there yet. So we're seeing now states talking about creating systems that allow information to flow from elementary to secondary to post-secondary, so we track our citizens. Accountability, that's essentially where that is coming from. Rewarding for degree completion, or clear movement, certainly in the SREB states, to do this. Louisiana, I'll use as a good example of a state that has said, and their model used to be, like most states, you get a new student, an FTE, we front load the FTE. Whether or not that FTE ultimately earns credit, ultimately a degree, doesn't really matter. You've got an FTE that's in the system to a point where you know you're going to need to have some support for the new FTE you bring in, but the payoff is going to come at the end if you in fact can keep that student and get him or her to degree completion. State financial aid, federal financial aid. The debate in Washington about deficits, cutting the budget, and so forth is intriguing. And we look at this in this broader context of they're kind of playing around with our tax dollars. Something's going to get cut. I mean, if you're cutting billions of dollars out of federal appropriations, something's going to get cut. And I'm fearful that the cut is going to come in significant ways in education. I really am concerned about that. And so now you look at our cost models. In the good old days of Virginia, it used to be a third, third, third. Parents or family would pay a third, the state would pay a third, and federal financial aid would pick up the other third. Now, I was at the Virginia Council of Higher Education from 1980 to 1985. By 1983, the third, third, third was already out of whack. And it would be sad to look at what it is today, because the cost basically shifted over mostly to the parents. Our financial aid, either state or federal, has not kept up. And so what are we left with? We're left with a lot of students who go out, who don't complete degrees, who have huge debt when they leave. In the good old days, if you went to graduate school, maybe you had a little debt. And now if you go to a two-year school, I can't even say community college in this state anymore, you're leaving with debt. It's a real challenge, and it's not getting any better. And changes in accreditation, and we'll get to spend some time talking about that as well. Much more skill-oriented, I think we're going to see that this notion of new and shorter pathways to degrees ties in with seat in a seat. And I'm intrigued by that, although be careful. University of Western Oklahoma, any of you heard of them? They've been in the press recently. They had athletes from around the country enrolling in their week or 2 week long courses online, and they were getting credit for these activities. Phil Moss, who's a longstanding colleague, who's retired yet again from the Oklahoma State Regents for Higher Education, took a team out to look at Western Oklahoma and came back with I haven't seen the report, but I knew got the results from a meeting last week with them. They're doing away with these little short courses because they discovered there was not enough rigor. Now, that's a good decision, a very positive decision, and I know the accrediting community is looking at that. The challenge is not that there was short, but that there was not rigor. I think you can do shorter time periods with rigor. I mean, most of us probably took courses in the summer that were a shortened time frame, and many of you probably are still offering courses in it. So we need to be careful about linking time to credit. I'm going to run out of time here. So some questions to ponder as I kind of finish up. I'm not going to read these to you. You can read them quite well from where you're sitting. I think you can see these. The two that I want to comment on. We need to somehow move away from a time-based model. If there was one message to you, it is, as you continue your deliberations and discussions during this conference today, are there strategies that, in fact, can move us away from this time-based model? And let me take it out of Florida. The Michigan states of the world, that's their biggest challenge. They didn't say this directly, but what I heard in this conversation, a lovely conversation with them. They're forward thinking and thinking about how they're going to do this new land grant mission and so forth. But ultimately, they were embracing the traditions of Michigan State University. You will come to campus. You will have 15-week semesters. We will teach our courses over 15 weeks. And if you link then 8 of these semesters together, students will graduate with 120 plus hours and get a baccalaureate degree. And that about 25 or 30% of the market of students is, in fact, that's how they're going. It's just, so we've got to make some adjustments. And then the last one is, and I think the biggest challenge is restoring our faith in this industry of ours, this lovely, marvelous industry of higher education. We haven't lost, but we are losing. We are slipping in terms of the public side. And we need to address that. And I would say that the largest challenge is changing the culture. Again, I'll go back to the Michigan State situation. Their biggest challenge is changing the culture, changing the thinking behind that university. And what I heard in a group of 25 administrators and some faculty were some who were essentially saying that, and others who were saying, hang on to what we got. We are the Spartans of Michigan State. They wear a lot of green up there too, I should add that. So can we, in terms of this culture, respond to the needs of the public, the demands of our student, the demands are changing, the demands or requirements of our policymakers, which we probably are fighting. Some of them we should, by the way. The interests of our faculty and our local academic communities is a huge, huge challenge for us. And can we deal with this kind of iron triangle notion of quality, cost, and access? And if you move any one of those up on the meter, you've got to move the other two up. I'm not convinced of that. I'm convinced that we, in fact, can deal with the elements of, or the peaks of those triangles. So, if not, I'm going to close here, the waters will be rough. Again, not a Florida shot, but this takes me back to my youth. In fact, kind of at the University of Florida. If so, calmer waters lie ahead. Anyone know what that river is? The Ish-Tuckney. Thank you very much. That's about the right size shape for us. So good luck. Thank you very much.